when we're talking about photosynthesis, of course, we know this to be the process through which plants make their own food. We know that plants are autotrophs. Okay, we have already compared your autotrophs to your heterotrophs, and we said your autotrophic organisms have the capacity to make their own food. And so plants here these are examples of your autotrophs. Okay, they have the capacity to make their own food, and of course they do this through the process of photosynthesis. Now we know that your reactants for photosynthesis would be light. Okay, that's sunlight. Now of course you have carbon dioxide, you have water. Sunlight, of course, is very important. This is the energy that drives the first part of your photosynthesis. Now we have to always remember that the sun is the only source of energy on Earth. Okay, so there's no other source for your plants to use at the very beginning of your photosynthesis of your chemical reaction but sunlight. Okay, that's sunlight, that is radiant energy coming from the sun. Now, of course, your carbon dioxide, this is taken in by the leaves of your plants through the holes on those leaves, and we call those holes the stomata. Okay, and of course, water is absorbed by the roots of your plants. Okay, so again, these are the reactants of the first stage of your first part of your photosynthesis. Generally, these are the reactants that we start with. And of course, photosynthesis can give us carbohydrates and oxygen. Now, carbohydrates here is often considered as the main product. Okay, this is the major product of photosynthesis because, of course, this is the food that is produced by your plants through photosynthesis. Okay, so this is the major product of photosynthesis. And of course, you also have oxygen. Oxygen is termed as a byproduct. That's BY, okay? BY product, byproduct. That means it is a waste product. Okay, why is this considered a waste product? Because of course your plants do not really need oxygen. Okay, oxygen is just given off to the atmosphere, and of course oxygen is used by organisms like us. Okay, so again, these are the three chemical reactants. These are the reactants that we start with in photosynthesis. And of course, we also have the products, that's carbohydrates and oxygen. Okay. Now, if someone would ask you, what are some factors that can affect photosynthesis? Of course, those factors can be light. There's carbon dioxide. There's also water. And another thing that can also affect photosynthesis would be temperature. Okay. So temperature is also affecting photosynthesis. Now, going to the next slide here, this picture was shown you in your warm-up, and you were asked to name the different reactants, the different products for each of the reactions that you have in photosynthesis. Because photosynthesis is not just a simple process. Okay, I think you're all familiar with the chemical equation for photosynthesis. Again, we start with your carbon dioxide, you have water, you have light energy, of course, that's sunlight. And of course, this is with the help of chlorophyll, that green pigment inside your chloroplast. And of course, the main product of photosynthesis would be glucose. And oxygen gas is considered a byproduct. It is a waste product. Now, as you can see, to make this chemical equation balanced, you need six molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water. Then, of course, that is going to give you 1 glucose molecule and 6 molecules of oxygen gas, okay? So this is the balanced chemical equation for photosynthesis. But then again, I'd like to stress photosynthesis is more than just this chemical equation, okay? It is not just a chemical equation that summarizes photosynthesis, because, of course, we have the light reaction and the dark reaction, okay? What's the difference between your light reaction? What is the difference between dark reaction? Your light reaction here is also called the light dependent reaction. Okay, again, I repeat, this is your light dependent reaction. Okay, so this type of reaction here, the first part of your photosynthesis, it needs light, okay? It needs light, and so it is called light reaction. It is called light-dependent reaction. Now, the second part of your photosynthesis is called dark reaction. This is called dark reaction because this is light-independent. That means it does not really need light for it to happen. This is also called your Calvin cycle, okay? So dark reaction is also called the light-independent reaction. does not need light. It is also called Calvin cycle. This is from the scientist who discovered it. Okay, the scientist's name was Melvin Calvin, hence the term Calvin cycle. Now again, we have the two stages of photosynthesis here. Your light reaction needs light, and of course dark reaction, light independent, also called your Calvin cycle. In your light reaction, this uses the first two reactants that we have. That would be light, and that is going to also be water. Okay, so light and water are used in the first part of photosynthesis. Okay, we use light because of course we say your sunlight, the light coming from your sun, is the main source of energy. Okay, and of course to start photosynthesis, we need to have energy first. Okay, so in here what happens is that sunlight is converted into other forms of energy. Okay, so light here, sun's radiant energy, sun's energy is converted into chemical energy. Okay, so again, light is one reactant that we start with in your light reaction. Another thing is that water, okay, water here, another reactant in photosynthesis, is converted into oxygen gas. Okay, so water is converted into oxygen gas. Now, in your warm-up a while ago, your reactants for your light reaction should have been sunlight or light and water. Okay, so those two are going to be the reactants of your light reaction. Now, the products would be oxygen. Oxygen is the first product, and the other two products would be ATP and NADPH. Okay, so that means your light reaction does not just produce your oxygen gas, it also produces your ATP and NADPH. Okay, now we'll get to those later. Now again, your light here is absorbed, and as for I've talked about your ATP, ADP cycles Monday, and then we said the law of conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. And so in your light reaction here, light energy, radiant energy coming from the sun, is actually converted into two other forms of energy. This is your chemical energy, which is of course found in the molecules of ATP and NADPH. Now remember, ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and we said much of the energy is in your phosphate groups here. Now NADPH, this is another molecule that has the capacity to store energy. Okay, it can also store energy. Now in your ATP, again, the energy is found in your phosphate groups. In your NADPH, the energy is found in the hydrogen. Okay, so hydrogen here has the concentration of energy. So again, in your light reaction, sunlight, light energy is converted into chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH, two molecules that can store energy. Okay, so that's the first thing, the first process that happens in the light reaction of your photosynthesis. Now, another thing is that water here is converted into oxygen. Okay, now your hint here is that you have an oxygen atom here. And of course, that oxygen atom is made to react with another oxygen atom. And that would in turn give us your oxygen gas. And of course, as I've mentioned, this oxygen gas is going to be given off in the atmosphere to be used in the respiration or breathing in animals. Okay, now another thing that I'd like to state to you is that light reactions would happen in the thylakoid of your chloroplast. The thylakoid in the chloroplast, these are the sacs that contain your chlorophyll. Okay, since it needs light reaction, it needs to happen in the thylakoid, that part, that sac that would include chlorophyll, because of course your chlorophyll is that pigment in plants that can harness, that can gather light energy. Okay, so again, I repeat, in your light reaction, first, light energy is converted to chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH. Another thing that happens is that water is converted into oxygen gas. Oxygen gas here is expelled into the air. Okay, so this is excreted into the air through the stomatastele of your plants. Now, this happens in the thylakoid, that part of your chloroplast that contains the pigment chlorophyll. So again, two things happen in your light reaction: sunlight. Light energy is converted into chemical energy, your ATP and your NADPH. Another thing, water is converted into oxygen gas. Happens in the thylakoid because your thylakoid contains chlorophyll, that pigment that can harness light energy. Okay, if you have no question, I'll move on to the next stage. Okay, the next stage here, the next reaction that we have, of course, good morning. The next reaction that we have here is a dark reaction, and we said this is your light independent reaction. Okay, light independent reaction. It does not use your sunlight. Now, I'd like to check, or I'd like to correct your misconception. It is not true that this happens at night. Okay, it can happen at night, but it can also actually happen during daytime. Okay, the only difference is that it does not directly use sunlight as its source of energy. Okay, so it does not use sunlight as the source of energy. Can happen at night, can also happen in the morning. Okay, so again, this is your dark reaction, your light independent reaction. This is also called your Calvin cycle, from the name of the scientist, Melvin Calvin. Now, can anyone tell us why the dark reaction does not need sunlight? Okay, now the dark reaction here again, this is your light independent reaction, does not need sunlight as a source of energy. The reason is because you already have your ATP and your NADPH here. Again, remember, this is your chemical energy, and this actually is the form of energy that we converted from sunlight. Okay, so remember, your light reaction converts light energy or sunlight into your ATP and NADPH. These are your chemical energies. Okay, so now your dark reaction does not really need sunlight anymore because you already have ATP and NADPH sources of energy that can drive that reaction. Okay, it can already start the reaction because you already have ATP and NADPH, the sources of energy for your dark reaction. Okay, so again, these two products here from your light reaction, those are going to be used to drive your Calvin cycle. Okay, these are going to become the fuels in your dark reaction now. These are going to become the source of energy in your dark reaction. Hence, the dark reaction does not need sunlight. Okay, it doesn't need sunlight because it already has different sources of energy. Okay, so what happens is that your ATP and your NADPH here, again, it would drive your Calvin cycle. Only one process that happens in your dark reaction is that your carbon dioxide is harnessed from the atmosphere. Okay, it is collected from the atmosphere. And of course, this is going to be converted into sugar. You know that sugar here is going to be glucose. That's C6H12O6. Okay. Now, one hint that I can give you, one tip that I can give you, of course, is that it has carbon. And you know your carbon dioxide has carbon. And so you know that this can produce sugar. Okay. Sugar, of course, is C6H12O6. Okay. So that is the only major process that happens here in your Calvin cycle. Okay, so again, Calvin cycle is the part of photosynthesis that makes glucose, that makes sugar, while your light reaction makes oxygen gas. And of course, it also gives your chemical energy, ATP and NADPH, that can drive your Calvin cycle, the dark reaction. And so the dark reaction does not need sunlight. Okay, does not need sunlight anymore. Now, we've talked about your ATP and your ADP cycles Monday. Okay, and we said your ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Your ADP is adenosine diphosphate. Okay, again, remember, your energy in your ATP is concentrated in the phosphate bonds, okay, in your phosphate group. And so ATP here has more energy than ADP. Now, since ATP is used in your Calvin cycle, it is going to release some form of energy, some of its energy, and so it is going to be converted into ADP. Now, it lacks its energy. Okay, again, remember, your ADP cannot store energy anymore. It needs to gain another phosphate group for it to become ATP, for it to become a storage for energy. So what it does is that it is put back to the light reaction so that it can gather energy again from the sun. Okay, so that it can become ATP again, and the cycle goes on forever. Okay, so again, ATP here is going to release it will release one of its phosphate group. And of course, that is going to be converted into ADP. Now, for your NADPH, as I've mentioned, your energy here is concentrated in your hydrogen. And so, as you can see, it has lost its hydrogen here. Okay, so it becomes NADP plus, and it also needs to go back to the light reaction to harness that energy from the sun again. Okay, convert that radiant energy into chemical energy again, into the form of ATP and NADPH. Now, any questions? Now, before I forget, your Calvin cycle, unlike your light reaction that happens in the thylakoid, that sac that has your chlorophyll, Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. Okay, stroma is the fluid inside your chloroplast. It does not happen in your chlorophyll. Again, does not need light, and so it does not need the pigment, which is chlorophyll, which collects light's energy, sunlight's energy. Okay, so again, going back to photosynthesis, it has two steps: your light reaction, light dependent reaction, and of course, it has the dark reaction, light independent reaction. This is also called Calvin cycle. Okay, light reaction, two processes happens here. Light energy or sunlight is converted into chemical energy, ATP and NADPH. Another thing, water is converted into oxygen gas. Now again, this happens in the thylakoid because that is where you find the chlorophyll pigments that can harness, that can collect sunlight. Now your Calvin cycle here, or dark reaction, does not need sunlight because it already has sources of energy, your ATP and your NADPH. Okay, phosphate group here has most of its energy, and hydrogen has most of the energy in your NADPH. Now only one process happens here. Carbon dioxide from the air is collected, and of course this is converted into sugar. Okay, that's C6H12O6. And then again, your ATP is converted into ADP, losing its energy. Your NADPH is converted into NADP+, losing its energy from hydrogen. And of course, these two would have to go back to your light reaction to get energy again. Okay, and this is a cycle. This happens. Okay, this happens forever inside your plant cells. And of course, this is very important for us because this would give us oxygen gas. Without oxygen, we will all die, okay? Because we need this for breathing. We need this for respiration. All right, any questions? Now, again, don't forget, Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. That is the fluid inside your chloroplast. Any questions? Okay, if you have no questions, I'll move on to the next slide. Now, this here just summarizes everything that I've mentioned. Light dependent, also known as light reaction, energy is converted. Okay, so solar energy, sun's energy to chemical energy. Again, that is in the form of ATP and NADPH. Light independent reaction, Calvin cycle. This is also called Calvin cycle from Melvin Calvin's name. And dark reaction because it does not need sunlight to drive it. Okay, it does not need sunlight to start the process. Again, it is not true that this only happens at night. It can even also happen in the morning. Okay, daytime can also happen. The only the meaning of your light independent there or dark reaction there is that it does not use sun's energy, okay, to start the process. Now, again, of course, remember the light independent reaction is that reaction that can give us sugar. Okay, so that converts carbon dioxide into glucose. So again, this is your light reaction. I've already discussed this. You have your water and your light energy. So in your warm-up today, this should have been your reactants, okay? So reactants for your light reaction should be water and light energy or sunlight, okay, or light coming from the sun. Then, of course, your products here, it is not only oxygen. It's not only oxygen that is the product. You also have ATP and your NADPH, the sources of energy, which is, of course, going to be used in the next stage, the next reaction of photosynthesis, okay? So, again, it produces ATP. It produces NADPH. If you want the full name for NADPH, it's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate hydrogen. Okay, so again, in this chemical substance, your energy is concentrated in your hydrogen. Okay, that's where you find most of the energy. And of course, it also releases O2 as a waste product. Now, again, remember, just like your ATP that has the capacity to store energy, NADPH is also functioning in the same way. Okay, it functions in the same way. Now, also remember, since this uses light energy, it has to happen in the thylakoid. Okay, it has to happen in the thylakoid, that part of your chloroplast that contains chlorophyll. Okay, because of course it needs sunlight. It needs to collect sunlight. Okay, now your Calvin cycle, this is the dark reaction, light independent reaction. You have carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And of course, you use ATP and NADPH. These were the products of the light reaction, and these are the sources of energy for your Calvin cycle or dark reaction. Hence, dark reaction does not need sunlight. Now, this in turn would give us sugar. Okay, from carbon dioxide here, we also are going to form your carbon-containing glucose here. And of course, ATP, since it has released its energy is used up, is going to be converted into ATP. And NADP, okay, your NADPH here, as I've mentioned, has energy in the hydrogen atoms, okay? So that hydrogen is going to be released, going to be used, and so that now is going to become your NADP. And of course, these two things here, these two substances are going to be returned to your light energy to harness more energy now, okay? They need to go back to being ATP and NADPH so that they can continue helping your Calvin cycle, helping your dark reaction, okay? So this process here continues forever, okay? It's a cycle, all right? And so this here summarizes your Calvin cycle, uses ATP and NADPH, the products of your light reaction, recycles them into ADP and NADP back to make more ATP and NADPH, and of course it builds sugars. The first sugar formed there is actually not glucose, but G3P, okay? This is a 3-carbon sugar, but then eventually that is going to be changed into glucose, okay? And that summarizes the light reaction and the dark reaction of your photosynthesis, okay? Now we go inside your thylakoids here. What happens? How does your light, or how does your plant harness energy coming from the sun? Now we have what we call photosystems, okay? A photosystem is a collection of molecules. Your chlorophylls and other pigments are embedded in the thylakoid. I've talked about the thylakoid. This is where the light reaction happens, and they are arranged as photosystems, okay? So when you say photosystem here, this is just a collection of molecules, and all your chlorophylls, all the other pigments are formed into your photosystem. Now in photosynthesis, there are actually 2 photosystems involved, your photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Now you need to remember that in photosynthesis, you have 2 types of chlorophyll there. Chlorophyll A is the major pigment that drives photosynthesis, okay? So chlorophyll B is also used, but this only contributes some of its energy to chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is the main pigment in your photosynthesis. Now, what starts the process of harnessing light or gathering light to be your photosystem 2, not photosystem 1. Photosystem 2 here and photosystem 1, they are named as such because the second stage here, the second photosystem, your photosystem 1 was actually discovered first, okay? So this was named photosystem 1, and later on, other scientists discovered photosystem 2, okay? But in the process of photosynthesis, it is photosystem 2 that actually starts gathering chlorophyll, okay, in the form of chlorophyll A. Now, as you can see here, both of these photosystems gather your energy, gather light with the wavelength of red, okay? So the wavelength of light here is red, okay? So for your P680, your photosystem 2 gathers P680. That means the nanometer, the wavelength of light here is 680. And for your photosystem 1, the second part that also harnesses your sunlight, it uses, or it absorbs 700 nanometer. That's the wavelength of light. Okay. Now, if you are going to check in your electromagnetic wave here, or electromagnetic spectrum, you can see that both of these wavelengths, 680 nanometers and 700 nanometers, these are actually red pigments, okay? So that means your plants, actually, your chlorophyll A and B, they both absorb red light, okay? Both of them would absorb red light. Now, going to the next slide here, chlorophyll A absorbs energy best in red, some of your blue wavelengths, okay? So both red, but mostly red, and some of the blue wavelengths of light. Now, it does not absorb green light. This actually is the reason why your leaves appear green. Okay, your leaves appear green. They look green to us when we are looking at your leaves. They look green because the green pigment, the green color from your wavelength is not absorbed by your leaves. Okay, so whatever is not absorbed, they are reflected back, and that is the color that we see. Okay, that's the color that we see. Again, I repeat, chlorophyll A absorbs red and blue wavelengths of light. Okay, so red and blue. Other forms of pigments like chlorophyll B, carotenoids, xanthophylls, they absorb light of different wavelengths. Okay, but again, I need you to remember chlorophyll A and B, they usually absorb, or they absorb red and blue light, never green light. So they reflect green light, and so that is the color that we see. Okay, so that's why the leaves, the plants would appear green in our eyes. Okay, now I don't want to talk about this. Okay, this is going to make you feel dizzy. So I don't want to really talk about this, but I just want to explain that when sunlight is absorbed, what happens is that the electrons in your chlorophyll gets excited, and so they move from one part of your chloroplast to another. Okay, and they in turn would make your electron transport chain. Electrons are transported from the different parts of your chloroplast, and so of course it drives the chemical equation. It starts the chemical equation. Okay. Don't focus on this. Okay. Now, again, so your light reaction, dark reaction, I hope this is all clear. We have light reaction, which uses sunlight. Sunlight here is converted into ATP and NADPH. Another thing that happens is that water is converted to oxygen. Happens in the thylakoid because that is where you find chlorophyll, okay, the green pigment of plants. Now, your Calvin cycle, also known as dark reaction, also known as light-independent reaction. In this reaction here, again, it does not use sunlight because it already has sources of energy, your ATP and NADPH, that actually were the products of your light reaction. And so this can now start the conversion of carbon dioxide into sugar. Okay, the main product of photosynthesis. Now ATP is reconverted into ADP because it has lost one phosphate group. NADPH is reconverted into NADP+. It has lost the hydrogen part there, okay? And of course, these are going to be given back or put to your light reaction to gather more energy so that Calvin cycle can continuously happen. Now, again, remember, Calvin cycle does not happen in the thylakoid. It happens in the stroma, the fluid inside your chloroplast, okay? Now, just one more thing that I need to add. There is an enzyme, a very important enzyme, the most common enzyme, the most abundant enzyme in the atmosphere and also in the environment, which harnesses or which gathers the carbon in the air, and that enzyme is called rubisco. Okay, rubisco. This is an enzyme which fixes carbon from air. Complete name is there, ribulose biphosphate carboxylase. The most important enzyme in the world, makes life out of air. So this is the enzyme that gathers carbon from the air. And of course, that carbon is going to be formed into carbon dioxide when it gets fixated with your oxygen gas. And of course, that can give us carbohydrates, okay, the glucose that is formed in your plants.